Rome feared him,
Persia collapsed before him.
but the most dangerous battle Khalid ibn al-Walid ever fought was the one that changed his own heart. In the 7th century, the world stood at the edge of transformation. Ancient empires still ruled vast territories. Byzantium held the lands of the Eastern Romans. The Sassanid Persians dominated Mesopotamia and beyond. Arabia, by contrast, was seen as a harsh and fragmented land, a place of tribes, trade routes, honor, and survival. But history often changes from places the powerful underestimate. And from the deserts of Arabia emerged a man whose name would come to symbolize speed, discipline, destruction, and military genius. His name was Khalid ibn al-Walid. He was born into the warrior aristocracy of Mecca. He was raised among horsemen, weapons, and tribal power. He began his life as an enemy of Islam, and then became one of its greatest defenders. Over the course of his military career, Khalid would fight in battle after battle without suffering a decisive defeat. He would help crush rebellions, shatter Persian armies, outmaneuver Byzantine commanders, cross impossible deserts, take fortified cities, and stand at the center of some of the most decisive campaigns in early Islamic history. But Khalid's story is not only the story of a conqueror, it is the story of a mind, a man shaped by discipline, a commander who understood that victory was not just physical, it was psychological, a strategist who knew that men lose battles in their minds before they lose them on the ground. This is the story of Khalid ibn al-Walid, the Sword of Allah. Chapter 1. The Makhzumite Crucible. To understand Khalid, one must begin with the world that made him. Khalid was born into the Banu Makhzum, one of the most powerful clans of the Quraysh tribe in Mecca. The Banu Makhzum were not known merely for wealth or social standing. They held a military function within Meccan society. They were associated with war, with cavalry, with weapons, with command. So Khalid was not introduced to warfare as an outsider. He was born into it. His father was al-Walid ibn al-Mughira, one of the most prominent men in Mecca. A man of immense prestige and wealth, he was called al-Wahid, meaning the unique. His position carried authority, and his household embodied the values of old Arabian nobility: courage, generosity, honor, and martial excellence. This was the atmosphere in which Khalid was raised. His education was not soft. It was not philosophical in the abstract. It was practical, physical, demanding. He learned to manage animals, to read men, to endure discomfort, and to master weapons. He was trained in horsemanship, camel handling, the spear, the sword, and wrestling. He grew into a man of formidable physical presence. Historical descriptions portray him as tall, broad-shouldered, lean, and powerfully built. Even in a society that valued strength, Khalid stood out. But physical power alone does not explain his later success. What made Khalid different was that he did not merely use force. He observed patterns, he learned timing, he studied behavior. He understood that horses, like men, can panic, that formations break not only from impact but from fear, that a good warrior strikes hard but a great commander strikes at the right moment. There was also another important aspect of his early development. Khalid was among the relatively few people in 6th century Mecca known to have been literate. He could read and write. This mattered. It suggests a mind that could absorb, organize, and plan at a higher level than most of his peers. He was not only a fighter, he was a thinker. Among the young men of his generation, one of his most notable rivals was his cousin, Umar ibn al-Khattab. Both were imposing, both were strong, both possessed powerful personalities, both would later stand among the giants of Islamic history. In their youth, they competed fiercely. One story tells of a wrestling match in which Khalid threw Umar with such force that Umar's leg was broken. Whether remembered in full detail or not, the story reflects something important. From a young age, Khalid was not merely strong, he was dominant. and the rivalry between him and Umar would continue across the years, later transforming into a more profound tension between the warrior and the statesman. Khalid's upbringing in a wealthy household also shaped his character in another way. He was generous, lavish, and unconcerned with economy. He spent freely. He lived with the confidence of a man who had never known scarcity in the way poorer tribesmen had. This trait would later become a point of conflict between him and Umar, whose personal style was austere and severe.
So before Khalid was a Muslim commander, before he was called the Sword of Allah, before empires learned to fear his name, he was a Makhzumite.
A son of military nobility, a man forged in the disciplines of old Arabia, a warrior long before he found a cause greater than tribe. Chapter 2: Defender of the Old Order. When the Prophet Muhammad began preaching Islam in Mecca, the city's power structure felt threatened. Islam challenged the tribal hierarchy. It undermined inherited privilege. It questioned the religious system around which Meccan identity and commerce were built. And for the elites of Quraysh, this was not merely a theological issue, it was political, social, and economic. The Banu Makhzum became some of Islam's fiercest opponents. Khalid stood with them. At this stage in his life, he was not confused about where he stood. He was a son of Quraysh, a defender of the established order, and Islam represented a force that seemed to threaten the foundations of his world. He did not participate in the Battle of Badr, the great early Muslim victory over Mecca, but Badr changed the political and emotional atmosphere of Arabia. The Meccan defeat was humiliating. It created pressure, it demanded retaliation, and it opened space for men like Khalid to step into more active military roles. That opportunity came at the Battle of Uhud. Uhud would become the first major display of Khalid's tactical genius. The battle began with the Muslims in a strong position. The Prophet had placed archers on a hill to secure the flank and protect the rear. As long as those archers held their post, the Muslim lines were difficult to break. Khalid, commanding cavalry, tested these positions and found no opening, so he waited. This is critical. Many commanders attack until they exhaust themselves. They push because they cannot tolerate delay. But Khalid had patience. He understood that battles change, that discipline fails, that human beings make mistakes when they think victory is already secured. And then it happened. As the battle appeared to turn in favor of the Muslims, some of the archers abandoned their assigned positions to collect spoils, despite clear orders not to leave. Khalid saw the opening instantly. He did not hesitate. He did not waste the moment. He moved with speed and precision. Leading his cavalry around the hill, he struck from the rear. The attack shattered the balance of the battlefield. Confusion spread, lines broke, momentum reversed. A Muslim victory turned into chaos. This maneuver at Uhud remains one of the clearest early examples of Khalid's military mind. He understood mobile warfare. He understood the value of cavalry as an instrument not merely of frontal shock, but of exploitation. Most importantly, he understood psychological timing. He struck not when the enemy was strongest, but when the enemy's discipline had lapsed. Uhud showed Arabia that Khalid ibn al-Walid was not simply brave.
He was dangerous. Because courage can be found in many men.
But timing belongs to very few. Chapter 3: The Inner Shift. The years after Uhud did not end the rise of Islam. That itself was significant. From Khalid's perspective, Islam should have weakened. It should have broken under pressure. Instead, it remained. It adapted, it expanded, its discipline deepened. This mattered. Khalid was not a fool. He was not a man incapable of recognizing reality. And over time, something began to change inside him. He began to see that this movement was not temporary, it was not merely emotional, It was not driven by tribal opportunism alone. It had coherence, it had resilience, it had purpose. The Treaty of Hudaybiyah created a pause in open confrontation. This pause gave space for reflection. Khalid observed the Muslims more closely. He saw their discipline during pilgrimage, he saw their unity, and he saw that their strength was not fading. One of the decisive moments came through a letter from his brother, Walid, who had accepted Islam. Walid wrote to Khalid in a tone that was both personal and piercing. He reportedly expressed astonishment that a man of Khalid's intelligence had not yet recognized the truth of Islam. And more importantly, he conveyed something astonishing. The Prophet himself had asked about Khalid and remarked that a man of his caliber could not remain ignorant of Islam forever. This struck deeply. Recognition from an enemy can be dismissed. Recognition from a respected opponent is different. Khalid had spent years fighting the Prophet's message, and now he heard that the Prophet saw something in him, that his mind, his capacity, his strength were not despised, but understood. He also experienced a symbolic dream in which he moved from a barren, constricted place into a vast green field, filled with light and life. To men of that age, dreams carried meaning. Whether taken literally or not, the symbolism reflected an internal transition. In 629 CE, Khalid left Mecca for Medina. On the road, he met others traveling for the same reason, including Amr ibn al-As and Uthman ibn Talha. 3 men, each formidable in his own right, each moving from the old order into the new. When Khalid arrived in Medina and stood before the Prophet, the moment was not theatrical. It did not need to be. Its significance was already immense. He accepted Islam. And with that, one of the most formidable enemies of the Muslim community became one of its greatest military assets. This was not merely a conversion of belief, it was a transfer of genius. The same mind that had nearly undone the Muslims at Uhud would now fight for them. The same discipline, the same patience, the same ability to read weakness would be turned outward against the enemies of the emerging Islamic State. And the consequences would reshape history. Chapter 4. Mu'tah and the Birth of the Sword. Only months after his conversion, Khalid faced his first great test as a Muslim commander. The setting was Mu'tah. The conflict began after a Muslim envoy was killed by a Ghassanid chieftain allied with Byzantium. In response, a Muslim army of around 3,000 men marched north. This force would meet a vastly larger Byzantine Ghassanid army. The Prophet appointed 3 commanders in sequence: Zayd ibn Haritha, Ja'far ibn Abi Talib, and Abdallah ibn Rawaha. One after another, they fell in battle. The situation became desperate. Leadership had been cut down. The army faced overwhelming odds. Collapse seemed near. And at this moment, Khalid stepped forward. This was his first major battlefield command as a Muslim. He inherited not an organized advantage, but a crisis. And here, one sees the emergence of a defining trait in his command style, the ability to recognize when victory is impossible in conventional terms, and to transform survival itself into a strategic success. Khalid fought fiercely. Tradition records that he broke multiple swords in the course of the battle. Whether the number is taken literally or symbolically, it conveys the intensity of the fighting and the force of his personal example. But the true brilliance of Mu'tah was not in heroic combat alone. It was in deception. That night, Khalid reorganized the army. He shifted men from rear positions to the front. He changed the arrangement of units so that the enemy, looking upon the Muslim lines the next morning, would believe that reinforcements had arrived. The Byzantines hesitated. And hesitation matters. In war, hesitation can preserve armies or destroy them. Khalid used that pause to conduct a disciplined withdrawal. He did not allow the retreat to become a rout. He preserved the army. This was not a victory in the simple sense, but it was a command performance of extraordinary value. A smaller army, decapitated in leadership, had escaped destruction against an imperial force. When Khalid returned to Medina, the Prophet gave him a title that would define him forever. Saif Allah, the Sword of Allah. This title was not just honorific, it captured how Khalid was now seen, not merely as a brave convert, not merely as a useful soldier, but as a weapon. Sharp, precise, devastating. Mu'tah was the beginning of his legend.
Chapter 5. The Ridda Wars and the Reforging of Arabia.
When the Prophet Muhammad died in 632 CE, Arabia shook. Many tribes had submitted to Islam during the Prophet's lifetime, but their understanding of loyalty varied. Some believed their allegiance had been personal to Muhammad, not institutional. Others refused to pay zakat, others followed false prophets. The peninsula began to fracture. This was the crisis known as the Ridda Wars. The new caliph, Abu Bakr, understood the stakes. If Arabia broke apart now, the Muslim polity would collapse before it truly formed. So he acted with firmness, dividing the Muslim forces into multiple corps to address the rebellions. Khalid received some of the most critical assignments. This was not accidental.
Abu Bakr knew the kind of war this was. Rapid, dangerous, tribal, fluid. It required a commander who could move fast, strike hard, and restore order with overwhelming force.
The most dangerous challenge came from Musaylima, later known as Musaylima the Liar, who commanded a large and determined force in Yamama. The Battle of Yamama was brutal. This was not a polished imperial engagement with neat lines and measured withdrawals. It was raw, close, and desperate. Musaylima's followers fought with fanatic determination. The Muslim army took heavy casualties, especially among those who had memorized the Quran. At points, the battle wavered. Even Khalid faced difficulty restoring order. And here again one sees his method. When formations blur and confusion spreads, Khalid reimposed identity. He reorganized the army by tribal units, calling upon each group's sense of honor and competition. This was psychologically astute. In a tribal society, anonymity weakens courage, but when a tribe fights under its own name, shame and honor become weapons. The battle intensified. Musaylima's forces eventually retreated into a fortified garden. The Muslims stormed it. What followed was slaughter so intense that the place became known as the Garden of Death. Musaylima was killed. The rebellion was crushed. Yamama mattered for more than military reasons. It unified Central Arabia. It destroyed the most serious internal military challenge to the caliphate, and it transformed the Muslim polity from a fragile community into a state capable of projecting force beyond the peninsula. The Sword of Allah had not only won battles, he had helped prevent political disintegration. Arabia was now being forged into a single power,
and soon that power would turn outward.
Chapter 6. Into Iraq, the Persian Test. In 633 CE, Abu Bakr sent Khalid eastward into Iraq, toward the territory of the Sassanid Persian Empire. This was a different kind of war. Arab tribal warfare was one thing, fighting one of the great empires of the age was another. Persia possessed heavy infantry, established command systems, administrative depth, and traditions of war far older than the Islamic State itself. But these strengths came with weaknesses. Their armies were powerful, but often less mobile. Their command culture could be rigid. Their battlefield assumptions had been shaped by other imperial wars, not by the fluid, fast-moving methods of Arabian cavalry warfare. Khalid saw this immediately. One of the first major engagements was the Battle of Chains. Before the battle, Khalid used psychological warfare. He sent a message to the Persian commander, Hormuz, calling on him to accept Islam and warning that he was bringing men who desired death as eagerly as the Persians desired life. This was not random rhetoric. It was designed to alter the moral frame of the conflict. Imperial armies often fight for pay, duty, or survival. A force that believes death itself may be honorable is psychologically different. Khalid understood the intimidating value of such conviction. In the battle itself, Hormuz was killed, and the Persian line, hampered by its own rigid arrangements, suffered heavily. Some accounts describe soldiers chained together to prevent retreat. If so, what was meant to ensure discipline became a trap once the line broke. But Khalid's eastern campaign would reach a higher level of tactical sophistication at Walid. At Walid, Khalid faced a Persian force substantially larger than his own. Here, he executed one of the most remarkable maneuvers of his career, a double envelopment. He concealed a cavalry reserve behind terrain. He allowed the center to bend under Persian pressure. He lured the enemy deeper into the field. Then, at the right moment, his hidden cavalry struck the Persian rear, while his wings closed from the sides. The result was encirclement. It is a maneuver associated with the greatest captains of antiquity, and Khalid executed it not as imitation, but as living battlefield art. Walid shows the maturity of his generalship. He was no longer merely a master of exploiting mistakes. He was actively shaping the enemy's perception and movement, building the conditions for destruction before the enemy realized the trap.
Then came Ulay's.
The battle was savage, and its memory is dark. Facing a coalition of Persian and allied Arab forces, Khalid made a severe vow that if granted victory, he would exact terrible punishment. After the battle, mass executions followed. Traditions describe blood flowing near the riverbank and later being mixed with water after a dam was opened. Even in a brutal age, Ulay stands out. For historians, it is a grim reminder that the early conquests were not abstract exercises in strategy. They involved terror, vengeance, and messages sent through exemplary violence. Khalid understood deterrence.
He understood that fear can conquer where swords have not yet reached.
This does not make the event less brutal, but it reveals something essential about his strategic mind. He did not only fight armies, he fought reputations, expectations, morale, and political will. And by now, the Eastern Front had learned to fear his arrival. Chapter 7. The Desert March. In 634 CE, the strategic center of gravity shifted again. The Muslim armies in Syria were facing increasing pressure from Byzantine forces. Abu Bakr needed reinforcement there quickly. The usual routes were too slow. If Khalid moved conventionally, he might arrive too late. So he chose the impossible route. He crossed the desert. Not a gentle frontier, not a tolerable road, but a waterless expanse many considered impassable for an army. This was more than courage. It was logistics. Khalid prepared camels by forcing them to drink beyond their normal fill, then preventing them from regurgitating. These animals became living reservoirs. During the march, they were slaughtered in sequence, providing both water and meat. It was brutal, it was efficient, it was brilliant. This is one of the reasons Khalid must be seen not only as a tactician, but as an operational commander of extraordinary ability. He did not merely maneuver on the battlefield. He understood movement across entire theaters of war. He understood that speed in campaign can decide battles before armies even meet. By crossing the desert, he appeared where the Byzantines did not expect him. This was one of his greatest strengths across his whole career. He repeatedly emerged from angles his enemies considered improbable or impossible. And the psychological effect of that cannot be overstated. When an enemy appears faster than expected from a direction thought impossible, morale cracks. Commanders lose confidence in their assumptions. Soldiers begin to feel hunted. Khalid's desert march elevated his reputation beyond that of a field general. It made him a master of movement itself. Chapter 8. Damascus. The city of Damascus was one of the jewels of Syria, ancient, rich, fortified, and strategically vital. Its walls were strong, its defenders numerous, and its symbolic value immense. To take Damascus was not merely to capture a city, it was to announce that the Byzantine frontier was vulnerable. Khalid approached the siege with characteristic clarity. He understood that a city is not merely walls, it is roads, supplies, relief forces, and information. So he worked to isolate Damascus, placing detachments to block routes and intercept support. When Emperor Heraclius sent a relief force, Khalid made a bold choice. He weakened part of the siege temporarily to move out and destroy the incoming army before it could reach the city. This decision reveals his priorities. Many commanders become fixated on the object in front of them, a city, a fort, a visible prize. Khalid understood that the true target was often the enemy's field army. If relief reached Damascus, the siege could fail. So he struck the relief force first, defeated it, and returned. Eventually, the fall of Damascus involved a combination of pressure, negotiation, and opportunism. Accounts speak of a local informant, a distracted gate, and a scaling operation conducted by Khalid and a picked force at night. At the same time, other Muslim commanders were engaged in negotiations elsewhere on the walls. The city fell, but Khalid did not stop there. Damascus's Byzantine elite were granted terms and a window to depart. Yet once that grace period ended, Khalid pursued the convoy carrying many of the city's important people and valuables. He caught them in difficult weather and struck decisively. Among the dead was Thomas, a major Byzantine commander and son-in-law of Heraclius. This pursuit shows another recurring element of Khalid's style. He did not allow enemy command structures to recover if he could help it. He understood that surviving elites rally resistance, so he targeted not only armies, but leadership continuity. Damascus was not just a military victory. It was a strategic fracture in Byzantine Syria. And Khalid had widened it. Chapter 9. The human weapons around him. No great commander works entirely alone. Khalid's campaigns were supported by fiercely loyal and capable subordinates who amplified his reach. Among the most famous was Dirar ibn al-Azwar, a warrior remembered for his speed, ferocity, and unusual battlefield behavior. He reportedly removed parts of his armor and even his shirt in battle, both from practicality and intimidation. He became a symbol of reckless courage and shock action. Dirar served as a kind of commando, scout, and rapid-action fighter. Men like him were invaluable to Khalid because his style of warfare depended on flexible, aggressive subordinates who could execute dangerous assignments quickly. Then there is Khawla bint al-Azwar, Dirar's sister, whose battlefield legend became one of the most striking stories of the conquest era. Accounts describe a mysterious veiled rider fighting with extraordinary courage, later revealed to be Khawla herself. Whether every detail is historically secure or partly heroic tradition, the symbolism is powerful. These stories reveal something broader about the Rashidun war effort. This was not war at a distance, it was not outsourced, it involved entire communities in morale, movement, and survival. Even the women of the camp could act as a psychological reserve, shaming retreating men back into the fight or defending the rear with improvised weapons. The society Khalid fought within was intensely mobilized, and that intensity mattered. It meant that when lines faltered, there was more than command holding them together. There was faith, honor, communal pressure, and the refusal to collapse. Khalid understood how to work within that system. He knew how to channel it, sharpen it, and unleash it at the decisive point. Chapter 10. Yarmouk. If one battle stands above the others in Khalid's military career, it is Yarmouk. Fought in 636 CE, Yarmouk was one of the most decisive battles in world history. It was not just another engagement, it was a civilizational turning point. A massive Byzantine effort to crush the Muslim presence in Syria would meet a commander at the height of his power. The Byzantine army was larger, in many accounts substantially larger. It included multiple contingents and experienced commanders. It had weight, equipment, and imperial prestige. Khalid responded first with reorganization. This is crucial. He did not accept the Muslim army as he found it, he reshaped it. He organized the infantry into numerous regiments and maintained a centralized cavalry reserve, often called the Mobile Guard. This reserve was one of his most brilliant instruments. Instead of dispersing all cavalry evenly, he retained a force that could move where the line was breaking, reinforce crisis points, or exploit openings. This was advanced command thinking. The battle unfolded over several days. The Byzantines tested the Muslim lines, attacked flanks, pressed centers, and tried to break cohesion through repeated pressure. Khalid responded dynamically. When one wing was under severe strain, the mobile guard moved. When enemy cavalry threatened, he countered. When morale dipped, the Muslim camp itself became a place of psychological resistance, with women and others pushing fleeing men back toward the battlefield. One of the most dramatic episodes associated with Yarmouk concerns a Byzantine commander known as George or Jaraja, who is said to have ridden out and questioned Khalid about Islam and the meaning of his title, the Sword of Allah. According to tradition, George was moved by Khalid's answers, accepted Islam, and returned to fight on the Muslim side, dying in battle. Whether preserved exactly or shaped by later narrative tradition, the story conveys something real about Khalid's image. He was not seen merely as a destroyer, he was seen as a man whose confidence, conviction, and clarity could affect even enemies in the midst of war. The climax of Yarmouk came when Khalid concentrated his cavalry for a decisive operational blow. Rather than remaining purely reactive, he shifted to full offensive exploitation. He outflanked the Byzantine left, seized critical escape routes, and turned pressure into disaster. Once the Byzantine army lost room to withdraw in order, the field became a trap. Yarmouk broke Byzantine power in Syria. Its consequences were enormous. An empire that had endured for centuries lost control of one of its richest regions. The balance of the Near East was permanently altered, and at the center of that transformation stood Khalid ibn al-Walid. Yarmouk was not won by strength alone. It was won by reorganization, flexibility, timing, reserves, terrain, morale, and relentless pressure at the right point. In other words, it was won by command. Chapter 11. Why Khalid rarely had lost. What had made Khalid so consistently effective? Not luck, not just courage, not just speed. It was a system of thought. First, psychological warfare. Khalid understood that battles begin before contact. Challenges, duels, threatening messages, bold maneuvers, impossible marches, and terrifying reprisals all contributed to the moral collapse of the enemy. Second, terrain exploitation. He used hills, ridges, valleys, passes, rivers, and deserts as active weapons. He did not merely fight on terrain, he fought with it. Third, mobility. His armies moved faster than their enemies expected. His cavalry was not just a striking arm, but a flexible instrument for reconnaissance, flank attack, reserve intervention, and pursuit. Fourth, operational art. Khalid balanced immediate battlefield tactics with long-term strategic goals. He knew when to preserve a force, when to pursue, when to annihilate a field army before taking a city, and when to accept risk for speed. Fifth, discipline under crisis. Some commanders are brilliant only when the battle follows the plan. Khalid was at his most dangerous when things were uncertain. At Mu'tah, Yamama, and Yarmouk, he showed that he could restore order in near collapse. Sixth, clarity of decisive action. Khalid did not waste his best troops in constant frontal effort. He looked for decisive points, a lapse in discipline at Uhud, a hidden flank at Walaja, a final cavalry concentration at Yarmouk. He saved force for the moment that mattered. This is why he became more than a successful commander. He became a case study in battlefield decision-making. Chapter 12. Umar and the Fall of the Sword. Yet even the greatest commander can be removed. After Abu Bakr's death, Umar ibn al-Khattab became caliph. Umar was a very different kind of leader. He was disciplined, austere, administrative, and deeply concerned with the moral and political shape of the state, and he respected Khalid, but he also feared the effect of Khalid's legend. Umar believed people were becoming too attached to Khalid personally, attributing victories to the man rather than to Allah. This was not a trivial concern in a society being built on religious submission and communal discipline. A hero too great can become a problem for a state. There were also administrative tensions. Khalid's generosity, spending habits, and informal style clashed with Umar's severity. Reports of large gifts, and even matters as small as personal luxuries, offended Umar's vision of public discipline. So Umar dismissed him from command. This remains one of the most remarkable moments in early Islamic history. A commander undefeated in battle. A man feared by empires, removed not by enemies, but by his own state. And Khalid's response is as revealing as his victories. He did not rebel, he did not fracture the army, he did not turn his prestige into political resistance. He obeyed. This is important. The same man who had broken armies accepted dismissal. That tells us that whatever ambition he had, it remained bounded by a larger loyalty. Whether one emphasizes faith, discipline, or obedience to authority, Khalid did not let personal glory become civil rupture. He retired to Homs, living no longer as supreme field commander, but as a servant of the state he had helped build. And here the rivalry of youth with Umar reaches its mature resolution. The wrestler and the warrior, the administrator and the conqueror, two hard men shaped differently, both necessary. Chapter 13. Death in Bed. Khalid ibn al-Walid died in 642 CE. Not in battle, not under a banner, not with a sword raised. He died in his bed. For a man like Khalid, this was almost an insult from fate. He is remembered as looking over his scarred body and lamenting that there was hardly a place on him untouched by wounds from spear, arrow, or sword, and yet he would die as a camel dies, in bed. It is one of the most human moments in his story, because beneath the legend there was a man who had spent his life in movement, violence, discipline, and command, a man who had expected, perhaps even desired, to meet death in the same environment in which he had lived most fully. But death does not always honor expectation, and there is irony here. The man who escaped destruction on countless battlefields was not claimed by the sword. He was claimed by time, yet even his enemies could not erase him, and even Umar, who dismissed him, is reported to have mourned him deeply. One statement attributed to Umar after Khalid's death is especially telling, that no woman would ever again give birth to the likes of Khalid. That is not merely praise, it is recognition that some men appear only once in history. Chapter 14. Strategic Legacy. So why does Khalid matter today? Because his life offers more than heroic memory. It offers lessons in strategy, leadership, mobility, morale, and the relationship between command and political authority. He showed how smaller, lighter forces can defeat larger imperial armies through speed and cohesion. He showed how psychological shock can substitute for numerical superiority. He showed how logistics can become a weapon. He showed that reserve forces are not wasted strength, but decisive strength. He showed that discipline in crisis matters more than confidence in comfort. He also embodied the limits of military fame within a state. No matter how brilliant the general, political leadership may still remove him for reasons beyond the battlefield, and perhaps that too is part of his greatness. Khalid not only knew how to command victory, he also knew how to absorb dismissal without breaking the order he had fought to expand. From Meccan noble to enemy of Islam, from convert to Saif Allah, from Mu'tah to Yamama, from Walaja to Damascus, from the desert march to Yarmouk. Khalid ibn al-Walid moved through history like a drawn blade, fast, cold, decisive. He was not merely a man who won battles, he was a man who understood that the deepest battlefield is the human mind. Break that, and armies follow.
Preserve that, and men can survive the impossible.
This is why Khalid remains one of the greatest military figures of late antiquity. Not because he was myth, but because he fused physical courage with operational intelligence in a way few commanders ever have. He changed the military history of Arabia, he accelerated the collapse of imperial confidence in the region, and he helped build a new geopolitical reality whose effects would endure for centuries. Khalid ibn al-Walid, the sword of Allah, a warrior of movement, a commander of timing, a master of morale. A name carried across deserts, rivers, cities, and empires. And long after the banners fell, the lesson remained. Victory does not always belong to the larger army. It belongs to the force that moves faster, thinks clearer, endures longer, and strikes at the breaking point of the enemy's will. This is warrior mentality.